Our fourth skill is about solving an equation for y in terms of x. This is just a fancy way of saying get y by itself. The specific directions say to write the equation in slope-intercept form. So what I just want to remind you right here is when we talk about a line, some of our equations might look like this, where we've got ax plus by equals c. This is referred to as standard form of a line. And our goal is to turn that into this form, y equals mx plus b, which is called slope-intercept form. And all we're wanting to do is do some algebra steps in order to get y by itself, because as I look from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, all that changes is y is by itself. Now, here's where I want you to be careful. This b right here is not the same b as over here. This letter m comes from the slope video from before. Realize that these letters, m and b, are not specific to these numbers. They're related, but it's not saying there's going to be a direct relationship between the two. So, with that, we're going to do two examples just so that you can see a couple different types of problems. So the first one I'm going to look at is this. Example 1. Negative 2x minus y is equal to negative 5. And my goal is to get y by itself. So I'm going to start off by moving this negative 2x. How do I undo a minus 2x? I merely need to add it to both sides. Now when I go to add it, I'm going to try to keep the arrangement that I want. So I'm going to put the x's before that leftover 5. So now I'm right here. I've got negative y is equal to 2x minus 5. So now these two lines right here are the same equation, and all I've done is one thing in between in order to try to get y by itself. However, I'm not quite done yet because this y still has a negative sign on it, and I don't want to keep that negative sign on it. I want to make it positive. So I've got a choice. I can divide by negative 1. I can multiply by negative 1. It doesn't quite matter. I'm going to divide just so we get in the habit of getting rid of that number in front of y. And when I do that, I want to make sure I do it to every term. So I'm going to do it to all 3 spots. When I do that, a negative divided by a negative is now a positive y. Positive 2 divided by a negative 1 is now a negative 2x. A negative 5 divided by negative 1 now becomes a plus 5. And I have my new equation. And what I want to clarify real quick is these two equations right here are the same thing. If I were to graph both those lines in black, I would get the same picture. We've just rearranged it. And depending on our understanding of lines, we might find this version a little more helpful. We're going to be playing with both, but that's essentially what's going on. At this point, I want to look at a second example, very similar to the first. And let's go right here. Negative 10x plus 4y equals negative 5. So very, very similar. I need to essentially do the same thing to start. I got to move this negative 10x. How do I undo a negative 10x? I need to add that 10x. So I'm going to add 10x to both sides. So now I've got 4y is equal to 10x minus 5. And then same as before, we divided by the negative 1, or the number in front of y, and in this case, the number in front of y is a 4. So I'm going to divide each part by 4. And when I do that, I now have y is equal to 10 over 4 x minus 5 over 4. And you could do some simplifying if you wanted to. You could write that as 5 over 2x, simplifying that fraction. You could spend each thing into a decimal, so 5 over 2 you could write as 2.5. the minus 5 over 40, you could do minus 1.25. So you've got multiple ways you can write these. I'll tell you up front, the way I have the problems coded, this should be acceptable, and you're totally fine to just leave your answer as this. I strongly encourage you, when you're filling this in on My Open Math, to take advantage of the preview button. And what that's going to do is it's going to show you what you typed in, how it actually looks math-like. And that can be helpful because sometimes, hey, maybe the x ends up on the denominator, or maybe the negative sign's in the wrong spot. So if you hit the preview button, that should help you figure out if you just have a formatting issue, because sometimes that's all that happens. We type it in slightly wrong, and the computer's doing its best to understand it, and it's just interpreting it a different way. But in both these cases, we went from standard form just by doing a couple of steps, and we ended up with vertex or slope intercept form.